Okay. All right. I just want to thank Greg for his presentation and for being willing to do this. And I think the topic was his idea, which I should have seen as a red flag. But the trap's set now, so it's too late. I debated with myself on exactly what to present here. There's a good couple dozen arguments for the existence of God. I worked with Greg for 4 years, and I think he's probably heard all of them from me. So I wanted to try to pick some things that were maybe unique to him, and maybe that you'll all get your money's worth as well. I'm glad he saved me a little time by defining naturalism. So methodological naturalism is not what I'm going to object to. And some of you may be disappointed. I'm not going to argue with Greg about how old the earth is and what natural processes exist and which ones don't. So what I'm going to object to is metaphysical naturalism. And my feeling is that it goes beyond empirical science and states there's nothing but natural elements and processes. And I think we'll be a little more contentious probably, because I actually agree with Greg on a lot of things. But if metaphysical naturalism is true, then all we're doing is moving particles around. I have a little analogy. My son, when he was a kid, liked to play video games. And my son played a lot of video games. And when my son was an adult, he liked to play video games. To the point, different son. Well, you probably So it was a little frustrating. One time I finally kind of joked with him. I said, all you're doing is moving particles around on a disk. Why are you wasting all your time moving particles around on a disk? And he kind of shrugged that off. But that's basically matter of fact, he's in the Army now, so someone else is yelling at him about what kind of time he spent. But that kind of gets to the basic idea of the argument that I want to get to tonight. I'm not going to argue with Greg about what natural processes exist, because he'll win the argument. And I don't have any problem with natural processes and which ones exist. If you have a scientific method that's verifiable, testable, and it comes up with certain conclusions, why would I object to that? Doesn't mean I accept scientific authorities necessarily, but I don't object to the method. But what I want to get to, and the point is if natural processes exist, what you can't do is use science to tell us that they're not intentional, that they don't have goals, and they don't have purposes. You can identify a process. That doesn't mean you can identify that process is a means or an agent. And I'm going to give you 3 intuitions that I think people universally have that should tell us that the things that we find are mechanisms, not their own agents. The first intuition is design. People universally see design in the world. And the world is. It's because the world has design, it has beauty, it has purpose. Individual material objects come together for shared purposes, like the different organs in our body come together to keep us alive. Your intuition when you see a spider web is that it's designed, right? And you're right, because the spider designed it. Even if the spider took 100 million years to learn that. I'm not agreeing with that or disagreeing. I'm just saying, even if that's the case, you may think, well, that's within my imagination. But the problem that I have is where imagination becomes really, really important is the spider has a silk extruder. And this is a gland in the spider. Very complex. We can't actually recreate how a spider makes silk. Protein chemicals are pumped into this gland, and cells draw the water out of them. And another port opens up in this duct that it's in, and hydrogen is pumped in, which acidifies it. It hardens, and then it's pumped out on the spider's request, and he can order sticky or non-sticky based on what he's working on. So even if you can imagine the spider getting clever and more clever in building a web, it takes a lot more imagination to imagine a silk extruder developing over time. And the more this becomes true is the more we learn about biology, the more amazing this becomes. So to Darwin, cells were just goo. He didn't know anything about cells. But we know now that these things are not just on the surface. We know that things are getting much more complex, not less. Cells consist of codes, machines, encoding, decoding, translating, and assembly. Genetic code itself is a set of rules by which information encoded within genetic material is translated into proteins by living cells. Listen to these words: code, set of rules, information, encoded, decoded, translation. little furnaces, assembling things. These are products of intelligence. That's what intuition tells me. Whatever natural processes exist that provide the diversity of life that we have today, they require DNA to happen. They work on DNA, and they don't start until there's DNA. DNA is information, complex and functional information that can only be explained by intelligence. And the smarter we get, probability actually confirms the intuition that every person has. Doug Axe is a molecular biologist who has a PhD from Caltech, and he worked for 14 years in Cambridge. He claims that functional sequences of protein occurring randomly are fantastically improbable. That's another word, a scientific word for impossible. 1 out of 10 to the 164th. Just to give you an idea of the size of this number, there's 10 to the 80th elementary particles in the universe. So if you were to take an electron, a proton, or a neutron, write my name on it, and hide it somewhere in the universe, blindfold me, spin me around, and have me pick it, somewhere in the universe, I find that exact particle, the odds of that happening are greater than the odds of a functioning protein occurring from a sea of amino acids. So what the naturalists will tell you that is, well, the magic ingredient is time. If you have enough time, that can happen. There's actually only 10 to the 16th seconds since the Big Bang. It's a lot smaller number. There's not enough time. And I would argue that those odds are so ridiculously impossible that there isn't enough time. I'm going to skip that for time's sake. Well, no, I won't. SETI is interesting. It kind of betrays this idea that knowledge, that functional information comes from intelligence. So SETI is a search for extraterrestrial life. They look in space for signals, right? And if the signal is, even if it's incredibly simple, if it's functional, Morse code, a sentence or a phrase comes out in Morse code, if that comes to us from space, what is everyone going to say? We're going to hear all over the news that there's intelligent life. But if we find something in our own cells as complicated as DNA, then we act like there's a question. It seems to me very intuitive that your intuition is rewarded by the fact that cells are very complex. Berkeley psychology professor Alison Gopnik in the Wall Street Journal describes this challenge for teachers of evolution. By elementary age, children start to invoke an ultimately godlike designer to explain the complexity of the world around them. Even children brought up as atheists. The more we learn about life, the harder this intuition is to ignore. Francis Crick was a co-discoverer of DNA. He constantly has to remind biology students that what you're looking at is not designed, it evolved. And the reason he has to do that is because it's so incredibly obvious that it is designed. And the naturalists will tell us to ignore our intuition and pretend like these things are not designed. That's my first intuition. The second intuition is that we universally hold is the intuition that we have free will. We make choices, and our choices are not predetermined by chemical reactions. Yet, if you're a naturalist or a materialist, this can't be. Choices, you cannot be actually making choices. Choices don't actually exist. They're the result of chemical processes. Richard Dawkins says this: as a naturalist, I believe that things are determined by antecedent events. And that commits me to the belief that when I think I'm exercising free will or making a choice, I'm deluding myself because my brain states are determined by physical events. Yet that conflicts with a very powerful subjective impression that we all do have free will. Lawrence Krauss in the same presentation says, yes, I agree, but the whole world behaves as if we have free will. Why does the world behave as if we have free will? What evolutionary process would account for the impression that we have free will? One consequence of this is if we don't have free will, then you can't be held accountable for the things that you do. And there's no objective morality. And Greg touched on this. I think we'll have something to argue about later. So a metaphysical naturalist has no basis for an objective morality. He can think culturally things are good and bad. Michael Roos, an agnostic philosopher of science, explains that the position of the modern evolutionist is that morality is a biological adaptation. No less than our hands, or our feet, or our teeth. When someone says, love your neighbor as yourself, they think they're appealing to something beyond, but they're not. It's just an illusion. Ethics are an illusion, and morality, objective morality, is an illusion. And that's true, right? If God does not exist, then objective morality simply does not exist. And I think Craig agreed with that. I won't speak for him though, for himself. Rape, for example, is something that's socially taboo, but there's no reason, there's no way you could say that rape is something that's wrong, right? A shark forcibly copulates with a female shark. Humans do the same thing. Why? What basis would you have for saying that is right or wrong? How could you possibly say that that something like that is wrong beyond socially accepted norms? And it's also contradictory. If morality was a product of unguided natural process, then telling lies wouldn't be wrong. Telling ineffective lies would be wrong. Telling whoppers, very creative lies, not getting caught in lies, would be of moral good. Sex, often and with as many people as possible, would be like the moral high bar. If evolution were determining our morality, that's what our morality would be. But yet, we all know that's not our morality. I have one more real quick. So basically, the intuition that we have free will and that objective morality exists can't be explained by naturalism. But I have one that's kind of interesting. It's a little bit tricky, and I'm hoping I can pull it off in 3.5 minutes. This is an interesting, and it's a new one to me. But it's basically the idea that reason and truth values are not compatible with evolution. Humans have the ability to reason. We can identify objective truths and weigh truth propositions, right? So where does that ability come from? You say, well, that evolved just like everything else. Imagine a planet where there's people or creatures that evolved strictly from natural processes. Okay, so their natural selection, anything that was adaptive, anything that was advantageous was selected, and their behavior modified and winnowed and got better and better and better because of their neurology. That's what determined how they became. However, their beliefs were also selected by neurology. Their beliefs were not selected by their content, whether they were true or not. Their beliefs would have followed along the process. What they believe is also a process of neurology. And it would not have any relationship. There's no reason to expect that it would have any relationship to what is actually true. So bring that back to ourselves. If you believe we've also evolved along that same process, yet at the same time, you feel we do have the ability to reason, inductive reasoning, logic, those are things we're capable of. You can't, it seems to me you can't have both. If you're a naturalist and an evolutionist, they're contradicting. You can have one or the other. Let me just close up here. So I want you to notice that each in these quotes that I gave you in these arguments, that a naturalist is warding you off of your intuition like a Jedi, right? The design you see is an illusion. The free will you exercise is an illusion. Morality that you hold is an illusion. Modern cosmology tells us the known universe begins to exist at a point in time. Everything that begins to exist has a cause. The best explanation for the universe beginning to exist, beginning is an external cause, something that's timeless and immaterial. So theism is the best explanation for both the natural world and the metaphysical realities that we all innately know to be true. So the question is, are we just moving particles around? Is that all that's happening here? And I think the answer is no. The author of the book of Hebrews in chapter 11, verse 3 tells us no. We understand that the universe was formed at God's command, so what is visible was made from what is invisible. Did I make it?